There are only 2 weeks left of the fantasy football season, or at least we hope to make it to that second week, right? Because we're on to round 2 of the fantasy playoffs. It's win and we're in the finals for so many of us. And if you're tuned into this episode, it means you are one who has a real shot to get there. We're going to do our best to hopefully help you bring it home here for 2025. I'm John Macri, joined as always by PFF's lead fantasy analyst, Nathan Jahnke. And for this episode of the PFF Fantasy Podcast, we'll be going over all of the top waiver wire options heading into week 16, aka round 2 of the fantasy football playoffs. For most of us, I'm not including those, crazy week 18 leagues. You guys are nuts playing in week 18. For the large majority of people, this is round 2 of the fantasy football playoffs. So Nate, Final Four for so many leagues. The pressure continues to kind of build as we're all knocking on that door and hoping there's a fantasy championship on the other side. So hope your teams are still alive and ready to go for round 2 of the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, for the most part, doing very well. In a lot of leagues, it's not 4 people. In my guillotine league, we're down to 3 people. I scored the most points. I have the most money left, so I'm hopeful in that league. Scott Fishbowl was able to advance in that one, was relying on Kenneth Gainwell after Chris Rodriguez was out, so I had to make a last-minute change to Gainwell, and luckily Gainwell pulled through, had lots of receptions, lots of carries. Barely anyone else in that game did all that much, so was able to advance in the Scott Fishbowl with the 500 teams left in that one. So,
wow.
But also the one league that you and I are in made it to the semifinals there.
Very nice. Yeah, this is Gainwell last night. Nice game from him for sure. Yeah, the receptions obviously help. What do you have? He had like 19 points, something like that. So I would say that's a nice little Monday Night Football guy to have in there, especially over some of the other ones. But one of those other ones, Darren Waller, we'll talk about him in a little bit. DK Metcalf found the end zone as well. Hopefully you guys all survived on Monday night and in round 1 of the fantasy football playoffs, and can join us here for round 2 because we're going to go over all these waiver wire options. Obviously an important stretch here. We're going to hopefully add some depth and some backup options for you, some matchup based guys as well, if you're looking to fill some holes here into week 16. And if you want the written version of this article as well, you can head over to pff.com and get access to Nate's waiver wire article with a PFF Plus subscription. And you can get access to that as well if you don't have a PFF Plus sub with the promo code HOLIDAY30, and that'll get you 30% off a PFF Plus subscription. So you'll not only get access to the waiver article and any other lock content, but player grades, prop tools, draft content. All of that's great stuff throughout the entire year. So make sure you get in there and save before the holidays, and obviously not just for this fantasy playoffs, but well into the next season as well. So again, Holiday 30 for 30% off a PFF Plus subscription. All right, Nate, we always start with the quarterback position, and it's been a massive position of need for so many fantasy rosters all season long, with so many injuries occurring throughout the year. Patrick Mahomes, the most recent victim after tearing his ACL. So here we are back again to the quarterback waiver wire targets, which is thankfully led by Jacoby Brissett, who continues to be great and had himself a nice game last week against a very tough Houston Texans defense, which was his toughest matchup of the fantasy playoffs on paper here, Nate. So Jacoby Brissett leads the way for us.
Available in 55% of ESPN leagues, so probably a lot of leagues that people are listening. He might not be available in your league, but he is available in some leagues. A lot of people dropped him because he had those back-to-back matchups, faced the Los Angeles Rams the week before. So on paper, those didn't look good. He wasn't as high in the rankings those 2 weeks, and the Cardinals wide receiver injuries keep happening. Lost another wide receiver this past week, so they're down like 6 of their top 7 wide receivers from the start of the season. But he keeps on doing well, throwing to Trey McBride, throwing to Michael Wilson. That seems to be all he needs to do. And the Cardinals often playing from behind, so they have to pass the ball a lot. More injuries at running back, so aren't able to run the ball as much. Faces the Atlanta Falcons and Cincinnati Bengals over the next 2 weeks. Those 2 matchups much more favorable than the 2 matchups that he just faced. He's been a top 12 fantasy quarterback every week. He's been the starter. So if you need a quarterback and he is available, I would definitely jump on picking him up, and perfectly happy to put him in my fantasy starting lineups over these next 2 weeks.
Nice. Yeah, he's been awesome this year. Definitely can't complain about him. I lost Jaden Daniels in a dynasty league for a big chunk of this season, obviously, and Jacoby Brissett has been carrying me here. I've definitely had to, hold my breath over these last 2 weeks with some really tough matchups, obviously against the Rams and the Texans, but he pulled it out, and he's helping me move on. So he's been awesome. 250 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns against the Texans, who have allowed the fewest touchdowns against coming into this week, and they were like top 5 in a lot of defensive categories. So I did not have Jacoby Brissett being, our potential QB savior this season on my bingo card, but as long as he could keep this momentum going in some better matchups the next 2 weeks, then he can actually end up being, one of the better waiver wire pickups of this entire season, considering, how bad the quarterback injuries have been. So make sure Jacoby Brissett is at least on your rosters. All right, another option who has been out here balling in recent weeks, taking advantage of some favorable matchups, but Trevor Lawrence coming off a 5 touchdown performance this week, Nate. The Jags did not want to let up against the Jets.
It was 6 touchdowns, 5 in the air and 1 on the ground. So he did very well. We've talked about him before on the Waiver Wire show as the quarterback who just keeps on outperforming everyone else who's typically available on the waiver wire. Hasn't had the greatest string of matchups, and he's had success against them. He's done it while injuries to some of his wide receivers, but he keeps doing well. He has matchups against the Denver Broncos, Indianapolis Colts over the next 2 weeks. Not the most favorable matchups, but he has just simply been playing too well to ignore at this point. So I'd also be happy to pick him up. He's another one who's only available in just over 50% of ESPN leagues, so might not be available to everyone. But if Brissett is not available and Lawrence is, I'd be fine picking him up. He'll probably be the highest guy in my rankings on the guys on the waiver wire outside of Brissett, so I'd be fine with him that way. But it's been an interesting year for quarterbacks. Like you said, a lot of these waiver wire guys have been the ones performing the best. We had Jackson Dart, who was a waiver wire guy early in the season, has been one of the top fantasy quarterbacks this season, and now Lawrence is like a top 5 guy over the past 10 plus weeks. So a lot of these guys who were available on the waiver wire at some point in the year turning out to be the best options, unless you've got Josh Allen.
Yeah, he's been on fire. It's crazy, like you said, the 5 passing touchdowns plus the 1 more on the ground. So yeah, against Denver this week, it'll be interesting, tougher matchup, obviously. But look, like you said, he's been playing so well. Just like Jacoby Brissett, you got to hope that he's going to overcome here just by again the passing volume. But Denver does rank second best, in yards per play allowed this year. They've allowed just 14 passing touchdowns on the year. That's tied for the 3rd best mark in the league. But again, like you said, Nate, Trevor Lawrence has been on fire. So we're going to ride that momentum here in week 16, potentially. And then next up, we saw JJ McCarthy deliver a nice fantasy performance against the Dallas Cowboys. That was a nice matchup, and he gets 2 more nice matchups these next couple of weeks, Nate.
We know he's had his accuracy issues this season, but he has been performing well anytime he's had an excellent matchup. Has scored at least 19.9 fantasy points in 4 or 5 matchups when he's faced a bottom 10 teams at preventing fantasy points to quarterbacks. He's had 2 of those matchups in the past 2 weeks, has 2 more these next 2 weeks, facing the New York Giants, Detroit Lions, both in the bottom 6 at preventing fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. So very strong matchups for him. He's already faced the Lions once this season and scored 19.9 points against them. So I know it's a little bit risky putting him in your fantasy starting lineup, but he's looked like he's been playing a little bit better recently. Hasn't been able to fully connect with Justin Jefferson yet, but if that starts to happen in one of these next 2 weeks, then he could have an even better performance than what we've been seeing. We've seen a lot of touchdowns from him, not quite as much yards. We saw a decent number of yards this past week, but a chance he gets even more yards these next 2 weeks. So he's risky. He is someone in Superflex leagues that I'm happy to rely on at this point in the season, even though my playoffs depend on him. But even in single quarterback leagues, if you're in a deeper league, a 12-team or 14-team league, and lost Patrick Mahomes, McCarthy might be your best option off the waiver wire.
Yeah, and like you said, like the matchups are really important here, considering, we've seen obviously the ugly floor of McCarthy a few times this year, but him taking advantage of these matchups has kind of been the key for him. And like you said, still doing it without big contributions from the other JJ, Justin Jefferson, which is, really surprising. I don't know why McCarthy hates Jefferson, but would be really nice if those two could kind of sort it out. Although at this point, maybe Jefferson fantasy managers are probably mostly done for the season after another dud performance this past week. But like you said, for JJ McCarthy's standpoint, if Jefferson starts to go off again, there's still room for that to happen and could really kind of boost his production as well. So hopefully that happens. happens, like you said, got a couple nice matchups here in these final 2 weeks. Last quarterback on the list, Marcus Mariota of the Washington Commanders. We got news yesterday that Jaden Daniels is indeed going to be shut down for the year. Not a huge surprise there. So Marcus Mariota could be an option here through these final couple weeks as well, Nate.
Yeah, he had generally been a borderline fantasy starter whenever he got the start for Washington. Didn't have the best week this past week in a favorable matchup against the Giants, only completed 10 passes, but got 211 yards and a touchdown on that. Also ran the ball 10 times for 43 yards, so good to see him running the ball a lot. Faces the Philadelphia Eagles this upcoming week, so I'm not sure I'd really want him in my lineup against the Eagles, but he follows that up with the game against the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys have allowed the most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. So if you're in a deep enough league where all the other quarterbacks are already taken that we talked about, Mariota might be the best option, but particularly for that week 17 matchup against the Cowboys, I would consider having him in my lineups that week because he could have a big game then.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. I like it. And I like that he's also been better for Terry McLaurin as well. For those of us who are in deep dynasty leagues that are counting on Terry McLaurin, we hope that Marcus Mariota can keep that going as well. All right, Nate, before we go on to the running back position, I want to let everybody know that our game plan of the week is presented by Western and Southern Financial Group, a game plan for your financial future. So obviously, if you're listening to this episode, then you've moved on in the fantasy football playoffs. You're into round 2. You're looking for maybe some replacement options, some depth options to fill any potential holes in your roster. And obviously, when it comes to fantasy playoffs, this do or die time of the season, the ultimate game plan is preparation, making sure no stone is left unturned, making sure you're prepared for any last minute inactives, shout out Romo Dunze, or decisions that, kind of need to be made, and putting out the best starting lineup possible to increase your chances of winning that illustrious fantasy championship. So that is our game plan. It's what it's all about this year in the fantasy playoffs. But you too should make your own game plan, whether it's for the fantasy playoffs or for life in general. Just like every team win starts with a great game plan, your future should too. With life insurance built like a championship roster, Western and Southern helps protect you and your family so you could focus on winning today, knowing tomorrow is covered. Whether you're just starting out, building your dynasty, or looking to lock in long-term protection, their coverage options are designed to match your game plan. Visit westernsouthern.com/PFF to get your free life quote and start building your financial game plan today. Western and Southern, built to win, backed by over 130 years of helping people protect what matters most. Okay, let's talk some running backs now. It's been slim pickings on the running back waiver wire this year, but luckily we've got some options for those teams in need this week or next, starting with Tyler Algier of the Atlanta Falcons, Nate.
Yeah, it's definitely a weird week for running backs. With the other positions, there are guys that I would suggest, even if you have a decent lineup, you at least consider. At running back, it is largely only consider one of these running backs if you need a running back, but there could be a decent number of teams who might need a running back because we did see a lot of injuries at the position this past week. So Algier is here largely because he is the safest option for this upcoming week. If you might need a running back, he's been pretty heavily involved anytime the Falcons are winning games, not quite as involved when they are losing games or even if they're tied. 20% of the Falcons' plays this season, whenever they've had a lead, have been a run to Algier, compared to 8.6% of plays when they are either losing or tied. So the game script has been heavily dependent on how Algier does. And they play the Arizona Cardinals this next week, a team that has been allowing 40 plus points in several of their recent games, have allowed some of the most fantasy points to running backs this season. So I expect this to be a game where the Falcons have a lead, are able to run the ball a lot, both with Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. So Arizona, fourth most fantasy points allowed. So I think Algier is someone who can safely get in that 10 to 15 carry range and be decently successful on those carries, has scored a decent amount of touchdowns this season. And with how much teams are scoring against Arizona, there's a solid enough chance that Algier scores a touchdown. So maybe not the highest ceiling guy that we'll be talking about, but I think that floor should be very high if you are in need of a running back specifically this week. Follows that up with the game against the Los Angeles Rams. Would not want him in my lineup in week 17. So this is very specifically a week 16 option.
Nice. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And look, like you said, Atlanta, they might be whatever it is, 5-9, but their odds probably pretty good against a poor Cardinals team and defense. They have allowed quite a bit of scores against, and I wouldn't be surprised to see if the Cardinals get behind early once again next week. And like you said, leading way for more Tyler Algier. So definitely a possibility for this week. And then also, Nate, Blake Corum found the end zone again this past week, even with Kyron Williams scoring twice as well. Corum continues to be heavily involved and widely available on the waiver wire, Nate.
Oh, yeah, he had a career high in terms of offensive snap percentage this past week. Generally, throughout the past 2 years, it's been Corum getting a drive or two. Last year, started to get rotated in for a couple more drives at the start of this year. At times, they've played around with a rotation by drive where it would be Williams one drive, Corum the next. This past week, they pretty strictly stuck with that for the first time throughout the entire game. A couple of drives that ran a little long, in which case they switched running backs mid-drive, but it was Williams the first drive, Corum the second, and they had 11 drives rather than 10, and that's the main reason why it wasn't exactly 50-50 split. So Corum, this is great for him. He's been playing very well throughout the season. So that's been good to see. This matchup this upcoming week against the Seattle Seahawks, I'm not sure I trust him as much there. I could see them turning a little bit more towards Williams in that game, since they've also said that they're trying to save Williams for the playoffs. And this is sort of like a playoff game because it's more or less determining who's going to get the number one seed in the NFC. So I'm not sure I want him this week, but like I said earlier, they play the Atlanta Falcons the following week. I would expect the Rams to be leading a lot in that game. And I would expect Corum to see a lot of volume, probably double-digit carries. So if you need a running back specifically for week 17, I think Corum is the best option.
Yeah, he's been great. Him and Kyron Williams really working effectively together. So nice to see him getting some opportunities there around the goal line as well. So that's been huge. But yeah, like you said, could definitely be a nice option here in week 17 at the very least. But let's go to the next name up here, which is Michael Carter of the Arizona Cardinals, because one of our other waiver wire running back targets from recent weeks, Bam Knight, he got banged up in this one, which is unfortunate coming off the news that Trey Benson was indeed getting shut down for the year. So the path was open for Knight, and now we move down the succession line as Carter could be the next man up here, Nate.
Yeah, Carter was pretty clearly the next man up this past week. He is available in a lot more leagues than the other two running backs we talked about, and it does sound like Knight's going to be week to week, which makes it sound like he's pretty unlikely to play this week. Games against the Atlanta Falcons and Cincinnati Bengals, so not the greatest opponents in the world, but certainly could be a lot worse over these next two games. There's lots of fears with Carter in that the Cardinals have abandoned their run game in a lot of games this season. Amari DiMercato returned from injury this past week, was more so eased into action, didn't see as many snaps as I was expecting, but wouldn't be surprised if DiMercato gets even more involved this week than he was last week. So a little concerns here and there, but this is a guy who is a starting running back. The Falcons have allowed a decent amount of fantasy running backs this season, so a lot will depend on how the game script goes. Carter also can catch passes, so that certainly helps. So if you need a running back because your running back got injured, and a lot of running backs did get injured this week, Carter very well could be the best option. Some of these 12-team leagues or deeper leagues.
Yeah, for sure. And the Cardinals run game, like you said, it hasn't been great this year. Hard to blame them with the list of injuries they've had at the position. But yeah, like you said, he brought in 4 catches as well for 38 yards, 56 rushing yards. So it's not like a terrible day. And that's at least repeatable numbers, if we're in those deeper leagues and need the running back help. And that was against the Houston Texans as well. So that does help that, the matchups won't be as tough for Carter if he is going to continue in that lead back role. Next up, we've talked a lot about Chris Rodriguez Jr. of the Washington Commanders, and naturally he got hurt and missed this week. So where did that bring us? But back to Bill Krosky Merritt, Nate.
Yeah, it was a very frustrating time after weeks and weeks of saying, yeah, he's the starter. He has rough matchups. He's going to have good matchups in the fantasy playoffs. He's going to have good matchups in the fantasy playoffs. And then it was Krosky Merritt who didn't even get the start this week. It was Jeremy McNichols who started the game for whatever reason. Washington really likes having a different running back start the first drive or two and then Krosky Merritt take over, even when they intend on Krosky Merritt being the main running back. But that's what they did this week. Luckily, it was only one drive where McNichols was the clear lead running back, and then Krosky Merritt was the primary guy over the rest of the game, with McNichols still as the backup running back on early downs, as well as his usual third down responsibilities. But like we've been saying for weeks, it was a good matchup for Washington running backs. Krosky Merritt had a fairly good game. So it'll be interesting to see what they do at running back over these next 2 weeks. Because Krosky Merritt played well, there's a chance he mixes in a little bit more, even if Rodriguez is back. It would be hard to trust either of them. This week they play the Philadelphia Eagles, so it's a game where they're probably going to be playing from behind. We see a bit of McNichols, so a lot of this is more so for week 17 when they face the Dallas Cowboys, a team that's allowed top 5 in fantasy points to running backs this season. So there's a chance it's going to be a full 3-man backfield between Krosky Merritt and Rodriguez and McNichols, which wouldn't be great for fantasy purposes in that game, but if Rodriguez continues to miss time, then Krosky Merritt should be the primary running back that week. So I have Krosky Merritt here instead of Rodriguez in the chance that Rodriguez continues to miss time, because if Rodriguez does come back, it'll be a little bit murky of a situation, but it still might be a better option than some of the other options we have on the list.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like, it's possible that Rodriguez is back next week and, maybe he'll be the better option again, but we're not really in a great position to be assuming at this point in the season. So make sure you're kind of insulated against these possibilities. And then obviously Krosky Merritt's value increases if Rodriguez does miss another game. So we lost another running back potentially this past week is RJ Harvey, who has been great since taking over for J.K. Dobbins. Harvey suffered an injury and could potentially miss some time. We'll see. But again, on the chance that he misses, then we'll need to add some help with Jaleel McLaughlin as a potential option, Nate.
Yeah, injury happened very near the end of the game, so didn't get a great chance to see if Harvey would have had a chance to come back. But they did add a running back off waivers yesterday, which probably is not the greatest sign for Harvey's health. So we could very well see McLaughlin as the lead running back for Denver. We'll probably continue to see some kind of 3-man rotation. We'll should still see Tyler Batty as the receiving back. We'll see someone as the other backup running back. They also have a couple options that they could elevate from the practice squad if they want. Sincere McCormick, Deuce Vaughn, 2 guys that most fantasy managers are at least aware of, especially if they're in dynasty leagues. Big reason why he's not higher on the list, even though it seems like Harvey could miss time, is the Broncos face the Jacksonville Jaguars and Kansas City Chiefs over the next 2 weeks, 2 of the top 6 teams at preventing fantasy points to running backs. So while he is an option because every running back who is a starter in the NFL and their lead running back is an option, but he's not going to be that highly ranked because of the matchups that he's in. So even if he is the starter, I could see him being ranked more like running back 31, running back 32, somewhere in that range. But there might not be that many better options. He's available in 99% of leagues. It's possible someone picked up Michael Carter in the middle of the season and they're out of the fantasy playoffs and never dropped him. Krosky Merritt, another player who seems to be a very clear player that a lot of people picked up early in the season and then very well should have dropped him earlier a couple weeks ago, a month ago, but didn't drop him, is available in just over 50% of ESPN leagues. So McLaughlin, the one player that is very highly available in all leagues. So he might be the best option if you're in a deep enough league.
Yeah, and the Broncos too, like they've had a decent enough rushing attack this season. That offensive line has allowed for the 6th most rushing yards before contact per attempt on the year and decent matchups ahead. So yeah, if RJ Harvey is going to miss time, then McLaughlin worth a shot potentially in deeper leagues. Not decent matchups, but opportunity there for him to touch the ball quite a bit. But yeah, we'll see what happens with RJ Harvey and Jaleel McLaughlin. But how about more running back injuries, Nate? Because another waiver wire target from recent weeks, Devin Neal, picked up a hamstring injury, thinning that Saints backfield even more and potentially leaving Evan Hull as the Saints RB1 in some nice matchups against the Jets and the Titans coming up, Nate.
Yeah, that injury also left me worried in a couple of my matchups because I had him start again. He had a good game, but only had a good game for the first half. In the second half of the game, we saw a pretty even rotation between Evan Hull and Audric Estime. Estime playing more of the receiving back role, which is the exact opposite of what he was doing in Denver, but that's how the Saints used him. It was pretty clear, like 50-50 split, at least in terms of playing time. But it was Hull who got the most carries. So out of the two running backs, he's probably the one that I would prefer. It's also worth noting, like, Alvin Kamara is still there. He's not on injured reserve. He hasn't been practicing, but a chance Kamara comes back, even if Devin Neal isn't able to play. A chance Neal is able to play this week. We're not sure what the full extent of his injury is, and the Saints will have at least a third running back that they bring up off the practice squad or something like that. So there could be another running back involved, and because this is the fourth and fifth or worst running backs on their depth chart this season after losing Kendre Miller as well, there's a chance that third running back ends up having a bigger role than we expect. So because of all of the uncertainty of who will be healthy, and even if both guys are not healthy, how the Saints will handle their backfield situation, this is why this backfield's the lowest on the list so far. Matchups against the New York Jets and Tennessee Titans, which should be decent matchups because they should be able to run the ball a lot. They shouldn't fall behind a lot in the game like they have in some other games where they've abandoned the run. So whoever is running the ball should see some volume. It could be Audric Estime, and it just wasn't last week, and they switch up how they're doing things this upcoming week. So that uncertainty is there. I also want to add, I didn't include any Houston Texans running backs. We saw Woody Marks suffer an injury, but there were reports he could have come back into the game if they needed him, which is why I left the Texans running backs off. Also a chance Nick Chubb, who was injured last week, could be back next week. So even if Marks does miss a game, it's unclear who would be the starting running back next week. But that's at least a situation worth monitoring if you're in one of these situations where you need a running back.
Yep, good call. Okay, Nate, how about another running back injury? Because why not? Javonte Williams is banged up coming out of week 15. So now Malik Davis makes the list this week as well for the Dallas Cowboys.
Davis has been the clear number 2 running back for the second half of the season for Dallas. They typically only have 2 halfbacks active each week. They make Jaden Blue a healthy inactive because their fullback, Hunter Lupke, is also capable of playing some halfback, particularly third down blocking situations. So Davis got all of the snaps throughout this first half once Williams suffered an injury. And the second half, Williams continued to play, but it was Davis leading the way. Williams, basically, whenever he was on the field, got the football, where Davis was on the field in all other situations. This is more here in case Williams suffers a setback over the next couple of days, or maybe a setback this upcoming week, in which case Davis would be the lead running back for Dallas. Available in over 99.5% of ESPN leagues. So 3 straight running backs that are available in 99+% of leagues. But I think you have the roster spot where you're just looking for a handcuff option of maybe this running back gets injured, then I can play someone in the fantasy championship game. I think Davis fits that description. They face Washington the last week of the season, which should be a fairly good matchup for them. Top 6 in terms of allowing fantasy points to running backs. So I'd be fine if you just have a roster spot and you have like some wide receiver, you're not starting over the next 2 weeks, or a backup tight end, you're not starting. Pick up Davis, see if something gets worse with Williams, in which case you could potentially start Davis in your fantasy championship round.
Yeah, definitely worth an ad. We don't know, exactly what's going to happen with Javonte Williams. And like you said, too, Hunter Lepke could work in there, but he also got hurt last game, and I think he was ruled out for that game as well on Sunday night. So potentially room for more Malik Davis as well if you need him. Okay, our Chase Brown handcuffs Samaje Perine. He stays on the list. He avoided injury himself this week. He left that game, but then was able to return, and he remained heavily involved again this past week, Nate.
Led the team in carries, which was a little surprising to see because he's on the field a lot more when the Bengals are losing games. That's potentially what led him to lead the team in carries, but that's kind of why we've been talking about him so much, is they had that stretch of games where they played Baltimore and then Buffalo and then Baltimore. So a bunch of rough games in there. The schedule gets a little bit easier over these next 2 weeks, faces the Miami Dolphins and Arizona Cardinals, but he's been working in a lot, especially in the run game. So if a lot of the running backs we talked about end up being healthy and a lot of the guys we just talked about don't end up being starters, then P. Ryan might be the best option in some of these 12-team leagues or deeper, just because we know he's going to get a number of carries. He's been relatively efficient on his carries so far this season, and he's still available in over 90% of ESPN leagues. So he could be the best deep league option if you're desperate for a running back, but a lot of the running backs who got hurt this past week end up being healthy.
Yeah, good call. Yeah, matchup against Miami is nice next week as well. Miami, I mean, they also potentially lost their best coverage defender in Minka Fitzpatrick as well. So maybe some room there for Cincinnati to maybe get a lead for once and run the ball a little bit more. But like you said, Samaje Perine, he should still be involved either way. And then last name on the list is Keaton Mitchell of the Baltimore Ravens, another player that continues to get looks here alongside Derrick Henry, but also has high-end handcuff value as well, Nate.
Yeah, he worked in more than he had in past games, was almost near even with Derrick Henry in terms of snaps and carries in the first half of the game. Also got involved a bit in the fourth quarter because Baltimore was doing fine, but he ran the ball 8 times for 66 yards. He's been the more productive running back in Baltimore this season. If it was earlier in the season, I might have him higher on the list because there's a chance that Mitchell would continue to get more involved. Because there's only 2 weeks left, it's hard to see Mitchell getting enough snaps to trust him in your fantasy starting lineup unless Derrick Henry gets injured. But he's been playing too well to not include in the list. If you're in one of these deeper leagues, he's available in 98+% of ESPN leagues. So a chance if you're desperate enough for a running back, he could be a good option. The only problem is the schedule isn't great the next 2 weeks, faces the Patriots and then the Packers. So 2 teams fighting for their playoff positioning as well as Baltimore. So we could see Mitchell continue to have some good efficiency in those games, but it all depends on how much volume he gets.
Yep, good call. And yeah, definitely more of a deeper league option there to keep an eye on. That's Keaton Mitchell. All right, we'll get into the waiver wire targets for wide receiver next. But first, one more quick ad break.
Everyone's got takes. Numbers have truth. And the truth is, most people are betting with emotion. Sportsbooks feed on it. TikTok gurus sell it. The hype machine runs on it. That's how you lose. PFF is different. You're betting with winning data. The same data trusted by all 32 NFL teams and the sharpest minds in the game. PFF betting tools take every prop, every matchup, every angle, and run them through our custom models. Built on the best football data in the world. What comes back is your edge. Simple, sharp, and built to win. Want to go deeper? PFF puts a pro-level analytics department in your hands, giving you the same insights teams use to find every advantage. Build your game plan with matchup analysis. Project every snap, every matchup, and every edge before kickoff. Because the smartest plays start long before Sunday. Hit rates show how a player performs against their prop and against defenses built the same way. It's the data that gives you real confidence in every pick. Next, Key Insights translates PFF data into the story behind every matchup, giving you the why that powers your bets. From coverage schemes to defensive looks, it's the context that turns raw numbers into winning decisions. When you're ready to take action, filter through every prop on the market and focus on the opportunities that matter, by game, matchup, or value. Then, shop for the best available line in your area and tap your book of choice to place the bet instantly. Everyone's got takes, but now you've got truth. Bet with data, win with PFF.
Okay, Nate, we're on to the wide receivers now, and we'll start in Green Bay, where Christian Watson picked up a shoulder injury, so potentially some more targets opened up for Jaden Reed, who leads off the wide receiver list of waiver wire targets this week.
Yeah, Reed is someone that I've been pretty constantly down on throughout his career because he only plays in 11 personnel for the Packers, who, when they have a lead, they have no problem switching to 12 personnel a lot more. But a lot of things have been going favorable for Reed, in which I would be comfortable trusting him at least this upcoming week. First off, we saw that injury to Watson, and Reed, if you look at his stats throughout his career, have been much better whenever Watson's been injured because both wide receivers are deep threats for the Packers. So whenever Watson's been out, then Reed's average depth of target goes higher. He makes more big plays, leads to more fantasy production. It does sound like there's a chance Watson plays this week, but even if Watson does play, he could be fairly limited in terms of his playing time. Another interesting thing to note with the Packers is they have a bunch of wide receivers. They have Dontavian Wicks, Matthew Golden, who haven't been all that involved these past 2 weeks. One of the reasons I was down on Reed earlier this season is I was worried both Wicks and Golden have been playing a lot in the slot. But since Reed's been back, that's been his job again. He hasn't been rotated out very much in 11 personnel. They also face the Bears this upcoming week, currently leading the division, so a team where they're probably going to be passing the ball a lot. They've also continued to deal with injuries at tight end outside of Tucker landing on injured reserve. They lost Josh Wiley this past week, so that brings them down to 2 tight ends. Could very well see them using more 11 personnel with the injuries that they have at tight end, so that means Reed's on the field more often. The Bears have also allowed a ton of fantasy points to wide receivers this season. I think it's the 4th most points to wide receivers so far. So a lot of things going right for Reed, making him a pretty decent wide receiver 3 option, a decent flex play. He's only available in just over 50% of ESPN leagues, so not available to everyone. But if he is available, I think he is someone that can slide into fantasy starting lineups this week. And they also have a pretty good matchup the following week against the Ravens. Ravens have been playing better over time, but another game where the Packers will need to be throwing the ball a lot.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And Jaden Reed too, like tied for the team lead in targets and receiving yards this past week. We haven't really seen him much this year because he's obviously been hurt, but he's tied for the team lead in targets in back-to-back weeks. So they're looking to get him involved. They're going to need him this week against the Bears, hopefully making up for some lost time here late in the year. And like you said, if Watson misses time, then that could open things up quite a bit more. So Nate, Jalen Coker is back on the waiver wire target list after a great game on Sunday where he led the team in receiving yards, scored a touchdown, much to the chagrin of Tetra McMillan managers like myself. But nice to see Coker back in the mix doing his thing. I think we'll get this at least a couple more times to close out the playoffs, Nate.
I think at least this week, we've seen his role be very consistent over the past month or so, playing 100% of 11 personnel snaps fairly consistently, and then almost never playing in the other personnel groupings, which it would have been nice to see him play more in 12 personnel this season, but it hasn't quite happened. But he's still been more involved in the passing game in recent weeks, has had at least 50 receiving yards in 3 of the past 4 games, so has been playing pretty decently, averaged 8.5 PPR points since week 11, which ranks 23rd best among wide receivers. So he has been playing fairly well. A big game for them this week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Buccaneers have generally been an above average matchup for wide receivers, but the big thing to note is it's an even better matchup for slot receivers. Tampa Bay has allowed the 4th most receptions to slot receivers over the season, specifically slot wide receivers, not counting when tight ends line up in the slot. So we could see Coker have a fairly good game. A lot of the teams that have excellent matchups this week don't necessarily have wide receivers available on the waiver wires. So if you think you need someone this week, especially in some of these 12 or 14 team leagues, then I think Coker can have a pretty big game this week.
Makes sense. Yeah, it was weird. They didn't really get much going through the year against the Saints, which was surprising. And they also lost that game, which is even maybe more surprising. So they're going to have to bounce back this week. Like you said, it's a huge game if they want a shot at the NFC South title. So that's got to lead to hopefully more passing, hopefully more involvement from both Jalen Coker and Tetra McMillan. We will have to see, but I'm with you. I like the chances here for week 16 for Jalen Coker. Luther Burden also still on the list, although he also picked up an injury this past week, Nate. Hopefully it's nothing major because it seems like Rome Odunze is probably going to miss a little bit more time after that late inactive this past week.
Yeah, I hope everyone was able to get Rome Odunze out of your fantasy lineup in the 5-minute window that you had. Crazy. Was a fun 5 minutes for me, updating the rankings, updating the projections, changing lineups, sharing on social media. updating things on Fantasy Pros as well. So it was a fun 5 minutes there. But Burden was having a very good game before the injury. He's been excellent this season, one of the top wide receivers in terms of yards per route run. His role hasn't been as big as we would hope with Rome Odunze out. It's still Olamide Zaccheaus, who's leading the team in snaps. So outside of DJ Moore, who's also there, but he's also been there throughout the entire season. But Burden was at least the clear number 3 wide receiver, still rotating in at times in 2 wide receiver sets as well. But he has been their top wide receiver for much of the second half of the season, even the middle parts of the season. So hopefully Burden's injury isn't too serious. They've said it's day to day, where they didn't close the idea on shutting down Rome Odunze for the season. So Burden, it sounds like he is healthier than Odunze at this point. Hopefully is able to play this upcoming week. Matchup against the Green Bay Packers, a team that just lost Micah Parsons. So that should have an impact on the Packers' pass defense in general. They've also allowed a decent amount of fantasy points to wide receivers this season. So a decent matchup then, and then follows that up with the San Francisco 49ers, a team that has generally been favorable to wide receivers, particularly those who line up in the slot. So Burden might be even higher on this list if we knew that he was fully healthy, but just a tad lower knowing that he might not be able to play this week.
Yeah, Burden he's been great since kind of taking on more of a role. So I really hope he's okay, because Odunze is probably not okay. That late inactive was brutal. I know a few people who got burned by that one. Is just awful timing there. But hopefully you all survived it. All right, Jaden Higgins, he didn't do much this past week, Nate, but he has been pretty involved recently for the most part, despite that rotation at wide receiver in Houston. And now he gets the Raiders in week 16.
He is someone that I anticipated being higher on this list today, but because of how he played this past week, he was lower. He saw the most playing time that he's seen in any game where Nico Collins was healthy this past week, because he has consistently been playing in 12 personnel and only rotating half the time in 11 personnel. But because the Texans had such a big lead this week, they were using a lot of 12 personnel, which led to Higgins seeing more playing time. And we anticipate a pretty similar thing this week against the Raiders. We expect them to be able to get a lead pretty early and maintain that lead, which should mean more 12 personnel for them, which means more Higgins, less Hutchinson, less from their slot receivers. The Raiders have allowed a decent amount of fantasy points to wide receivers this season, but Nico Collins has also been playing very well recently. A chance that just all goes to Collins and the tight ends, and not so much for Higgins, but hopefully we were seeing Higgins pretty consistently catch 3 to 5 passes for around 50 yards. So wouldn't be surprised if he at least clears 40 or 50 yards this week. So probably only someone to consider starting if you're in a little bit of a deeper league, but I think there is a better chance he has a good game this week than most weeks this season.
Yeah, it's a great matchup. That Raiders defense, they definitely have coverage problems. They are the worst graded coverage unit in the league here at PFF with just a 33.2 coverage grade. I have to imagine the Texans will be able to exploit this matchup, which hopefully means more Jaden Higgins as well. So the last wide receiver waiver wire target, Nate, is Darius Slayton of the New York Gigantes. Slayton has been a go-to target for the Giants. So hoping for more of the same here to close out the year.
It feels like there's been a couple years now where Slayton is basically the borderline of who should and should not be on fantasy rosters, and he's been right there. Had plenty of targets this past week. Since the start of November, he's posted at least, he's had games of 5 catches for 62 yards, 4 catches for 89 yards, 2 for 41, and a touchdown. This past week, 4 for 53. So he's been pretty consistently putting up around 9 or so PPR points. Doesn't have the greatest matchup this upcoming weekend. It's the Minnesota Vikings, so he is more here if you need a wide receiver for the fantasy championship round in a deeper league. They are the team that faces the Raiders that week. So like we just said, Raiders secondary has not been playing well, so a chance Slayton is able to have a big game in fantasy championship weekend.
There you go. All right. Let's wrap it up here with the tight ends, led by the 2-touchdown man himself, Colby Parkinson, although I'm still not convinced one should have counted. Pretty surprising there, but I guess we move on. And potentially, for the Rams, no Devontae Adams on Thursday, so Parkinson could be heavily involved once again, Nate.
Yeah. So at running back and wide receiver, there was a lot of only pick up these guys if you're more so in need outside of Jaden Reed, who I would trust as a wide receiver 3. At tight end, there's a couple of guys who probably could go straight into fantasy starting lineups this week if you've been struggling at tight end. Parkinson, it's kind of been a perfect storm of all the things that are happening this upcoming week. They have been using 13 personnel at a historic rate. The top 2 games in PFF history in terms of a team using 13 personnel was this past week with the Rams and the week before with the Rams. So they've been using this more than we have ever seen any team use 13 personnel, which means Parkinson is on the field for the vast majority of plays. He's been scoring a lot of touchdowns. I considered including him on the list last week, but I saw it was just touchdowns and not that many yards. But this week he had the yards to go along with it, had 5 passes for 75 yards. The big thing, like you mentioned, Davante Adams dealing with an injury. It sounded like he could miss some time, and they have the Thursday night game. So pretty likely that Adams is not going to play this week. Adams is the primary competition for Parkinson for red zone touchdown. So a decent chance Parkinson is able to score. Facing the Seattle Seahawks, the team that has allowed a ton of fantasy points to tight ends this season. They've been excellent stopping quarterbacks, stopping running backs, stopping wide receivers, not so good against tight ends. Part of that's because they are in the division with Trey McBride and George Kittle, so that certainly plays a role in things, but they also have a lot of receiving yards or season highs in terms of receiving yards to a couple other surprising tight ends this season. Also a revenge game if you care about that narrative as well, but I could see Parkinson having a big week knowing that Davante Adams is out against Seattle's defense. And he's been scoring a ton of touchdowns recently. I think it's 6 touchdowns in the past 6 games. So he is someone that I think can be in fantasy starting lineups this week.
Yeah, that's a good call. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Seattle can, like you said, get any better defending the tight ends. I mean, Nick Emenwari, who the rookie defender there, defensive back for Seattle, he's been awesome. They haven't had him for the entire season, but he's taken on more of a role in the slot as well. So it'll be interesting to see if he gets to see more of Colby Parkinson. But like you said, everything else, I mean, yeah, Parkinson, it's lined up nicely for him here heading into week 16 regardless. And like you said, I still think an exploitable matchup here for the Rams and Parkinson's, especially if Davante Adams is going to miss time. So Darren Waller is up next, and he's been on this list for a while, specifically for the fantasy playoffs. So hopefully you listen, because he scored all of Miami's touchdowns last night with a massive 7-catch, 66-yard, 2-touchdown performance. Nate, this is kind of what we've been hoping for with Waller during this final stretch.
Yeah, I was all ready to be a little optimistic about him last night after 3 quarters or so. It was like he's playing more in 12 personnel than we're used to. He was playing more on third downs than we were used to, which was all good to see. But Miami was just getting destroyed in terms of time of possession. And the second half, their first 2 drives were both 3 and outs where they lost 20 yards, I think, on those 2 drives. So things weren't looking well for Miami. But then when they were down by multiple scores and passing to catch up, Waller was the go-to guy, scored the 2 touchdowns, had lots of catches. It was kind of going back and forth. I had written in my recap article that, like, okay, Waller's leading the team in receiving. Now it's Achane. Now it's Waller. Now it's Achane. They were going back and forth. So that was fun while writing that article. But Waller has been playing well, and they face the Cincinnati Bengals this week, the team that's allowed by far the most fantasy points to tight ends this season. This past week, Cincinnati didn't allow a lot to tight ends, but they allowed plenty to everyone else. So that wasn't that big of a deal unless you trusted Isaiah Likely, where I likely didn't have a single target, which was disappointing to see. But I would still trust how the Bengals have performed against tight ends every other game compared to what they did this past week. Waller could have a very big week. It depends how much risk you're willing to take, because Waller is still only seeing roughly half of the offensive snaps. I think Parkinson is the safer option this week because he is consistently on the field and everything else that we talked about. But I think Waller probably has the most upside. Waller could be the clear top receiver for Miami this week. We've seen huge games out of him in the past. So if you are looking for that higher upside play, I would go for Waller. But if you need that safer, more consistent play, I would go with Parkinson.
Nice. Yeah, good call. Yeah, the Bengals thing felt like definitely like an outlier, the Bengals thing felt like definitely like an outlier, considering how their season has gone, stopping Isaiah Likely from even getting a single target, and then Mark Andrews, I think, just had the one catch, right? So, yeah, we know the Bengals defense is not that special as stopping tight ends, so I wouldn't be surprised if that was just an outlier week. And then Nate. Somehow Brenton Strange had just one catch as well, and not for a touchdown in Trevor Lawrence's 5 passing touchdown explosion game. But he is operating as the clear tight end one in that offense, and the tight end matchups aren't too bad for him to close out the year.
Yeah, his playing time has been consistent all year. Just the matchups haven't been great at this stretch of the season. I remember a couple of weeks ago, it was lining up very nicely that you would start Darren Waller in the middle 2 weeks, start Brenton Strange weeks 14, week 17. So Strange is here because he faces the Denver Broncos this week, which isn't the greatest matchup. It's pretty average. And then the Indianapolis Colts, which has been a decently favorable matchup for tight ends this season. The two guys we started talking about, Parkinson, his matchup against the Atlanta Falcons is not great for tight ends. They've allowed the second fewest fantasy points to tight ends this season. So Parkinson's more so here. If you need a tight end this week, similarly Waller, it's an okay matchup in week 17, faces the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So that's actually been a pretty favorable matchup. So Waller is someone you could consider in week 17, but I think Strange against the Indianapolis Colts should have a good game that week. So I wouldn't be too concerned about how he played this week. Maybe someone who gets dropped in some leagues based on his performance. So someone who might be a little more available next week as well.
Nice. All right. And then finally, AJ Barner of the Seattle Seahawks could be a nice deep league option these last couple weeks as well, Nate.
Yeah, Elijah Arroyo suffered a knee injury, ended up on injured reserve, so he at least won't be back in the regular season. That did help Barner get a little bit more playing time this past week, so that was good to see. Saw 6 targets, 3 receptions. Wasn't the biggest game out of him. He's been basically up and down throughout the entire season, a clear tight end 2 for most of the year. Seahawks have that important game against the Los Angeles Rams on Thursday. Rams have allowed an above average, have been an above average matchup for tight ends this season. But other tight ends we've talked about have been better, but he follows that up with the game against the Carolina Panthers. They've allowed the 11th most fantasy points to tight ends this season. So if you are in need of a tight end in the fantasy championship week, like I said, some of the other guys we talked about either don't have the greatest matchup or aren't as available as AJ Barner is. So there's a chance if you're in one of these deeper leagues where Barner could be the best option over these next 2 weeks. But hopefully if you're in one of these deeper leagues, you don't have that big of a need at tight end.
All right, that's it for us this week. Thanks to everybody who tuned in. Good luck, obviously, attacking those waiver wires, and more importantly, good luck in round 2 of the fantasy football playoffs. Thank you to you, Nate, for putting this list together. Thank you to the best data collection team in the multiverse as well for gathering all of this data for us. Nate, before we go, please do let everybody know what you have going on over at pff.com this week to help them through round 2 of the fantasy playoffs.
Have the recap articles up as always. Plenty of interesting things happen this week. Also, if you go to the usage and production report where I summarize the top 10 things, a lot of backfields where we either saw a lead running back take an even bigger lead than we've seen in the past, teams relying on their lead running back down the stretch, or some teams that are going closer to a 50-50 split. Also interesting things with the Buccaneers wide receivers, for example, some interesting things at tight end. So definitely check out the recap and usage and production report for that. If we do have any big breaking news that could impact waivers, I will update the waiver wire article today. So keep an eye out for that as well. We'll have the rankings up. We'll have start set up later in the week, and then we do it all again next week for one more week, and then it starts to get ready for 2026. Have already started tinkering with 2026 fantasy rankings, so I look forward to putting that up after week 17.
Nice. Love it. Yeah. So make sure you lock in. And if you don't have a PFF Plus subscription just yet, you can get one with the promo code Holiday30. That'll get you 30% off, and that'll carry you through all the way through this time next year. So definitely a good time to get in there and utilize the promo code. As for me, IDP Fantasy Report, that's up there now with all the snap shares for all the IDPs, waiver wire targets on defense as well. IDP rankings, wide receiver man zone coverage report, and the red zone report. They'll all be out as usual this week. Nothing changes there. And then again, promo code Holiday30 for 30% off a PFF Plus subscription. So good luck to everybody in week 16 and round 2 of the fantasy football playoffs. And until next time, peace out.